As I begin, I need to acknowledge a couple of sources. I have many times run the Christianity Explained course, written by Michael Bennett, an Anglican priest, and his material has been out there for many, many years, and I have taught that course many, many times. In some areas of Christian basics, I find it the very best way to communicate what I believe needs to be communicated, and I am using my experience with that course at some times, this week being one example of that. I've also been involved as a participant, as a leader, and as a director of both the Adult and Youth Alpha, Adult Alpha and Youth Alpha series, and it too is wonderful, but Nikki generally talks for about an hour at a time, and we can't fit that into a church service. So there will be elements of what I've learnt from that experience in this series as well, plus other things that I have picked up along the way that don't belong to either of those. So my apologies to Michael and my apologies to Nikki, but let's then make a start. We are this morning using Mark's Gospel, in fact the early part of Mark's Gospel, and it begins with a stunning claim. The stunning claim is this, the very first words in Mark's Gospel: the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. And you might say, well, I've read that a few times, it didn't stun me. You weren't a first century Jew. You are not a first century Jew reading those words. Or for that matter, a first century Roman citizen, or anyone in the ancient Roman Empire reading that claim. To them, it would have been quite a stunning and dangerous claim. First of all, this Jesus, he says, is the Messiah, the one that the Jews have been waiting for centuries. The one that God promised who would come and save us. Secondly, the Son of God. A dramatic claim, but all the more dramatic because the Roman emperors of the time were claiming that they were sons of the gods and that they themselves should be worshipped. And so by saying this, is not a Son of God, the Son of God, what Mark is writing and saying is, to the non-Jews, to the Gentiles of the time, the people under the Roman Empire who are Gentiles, he is saying, Caesar is not a son of God. This Jesus of Nazareth is the Son of God. It's a very potent statement, and all of this wrapped in Mark 1, verse 1. Imagine how much is wrapped in all the rest. And we're only going to take some little bits. But this claim that he's the Messiah, that's the Jewish promise. The other claim that Jesus is the Son of God is the one that requires the most unwrapping for us. It causes us the most distress and difficulty because people go, well, we know how babies get made, sons and daughters get made and all the rest of it, and are we really supposed to think that way about Jesus and God and that relationship? And the answer is no. The reason that we say he's the Son of God and we believe he's the Son of God is it's the best language that we have in our limited vocabulary to try to describe this unique individual. But Mark heads off from chapter 1, verse 1 to immediately try to explain his claim, to validate his claim. And he begins by quoting Isaiah about the promised Messiah. And there are other quotes from the Old Testament that he uses, all of these to try to justify the claim that he's the Messiah. But then he uses another particular technique all the way through, especially in the first 5 chapters of Mark's Gospel. And in the added material that I've given you today, I do encourage you to at least read the first 5 chapters of Mark's Gospel this week and look for these things. I'm only using a few this morning, but there's a whole bunch of others. And it's a very Jewish thing. It's a it's a thing very much tied to their culture at their time, but we can understand it. In their culture, the authority that belonged to a father belonged to their son, especially the eldest son. But the father's sons had this authority. So supposing they were a substantial landowner that hired servants, had some slaves, they did that in their day, and they did business with people who would come in, and there was stuff going on like that. The father was the authority figure. But say dad was out doing some work when there was some instruction required. If one of the sons gave instructions or made decisions in the father's absence, they carried the same authority as what the father would carry. And being an honour-shame culture, Dad would not come back, even if the decision or the statement was wrong. Dad would not come and shame the son, because he would be diminishing his own authority by saying in public that the son was wrong. He might go and teach his son in private, but there was this thing that existed in the time. It was very clear. This was the way they lived. So they knew this as good as getting up in the morning. So the son bears the authority of the father. This is what Mark tries to show us, to prove to us that this Jesus of Nazareth really is the Son of God. And we're going to see a few instances. I'm going to try not to take your whole morning, but they are important. So our first reading is coming from Mark chapter 1, 21 to 28, and one of these people is going to stand up and bring it to us.
At Capernaum, on Wednesday Sabbath came, Jesus entered the synagogue and began to teach. People were amazed at his teaching, because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Just then a man in the synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want of us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." The impure spirit took the man violently and came out of him to the street. The people were also amazed as they asked each other, "What is this, a new teaching and with authority? He even gives orders to impure spirits and they obey him." Used now in his fit to clear the whole region of Galilee.
In this first reading, Mark does something that we'll meet again, and it's not uncommon. He couples two issues together into one story. There are two examples of authority, and he uses the word authority to make this perfectly plain. What was the first authority he demonstrated? Can you remember? Teaching. He spoke as one who had authority, and they were amazed by his teaching. He spoke as one who had authority, not like the teachers of the law. They were not unlike ministers that I see on Facebook today, who post quotes from other people's books all the time, but never put up anything about what they think. Because you get shot down in flames for doing so. It was worse. It was deadly dangerous in their day to go saying, "This is what you should believe because this is what I believe." They were always quoting Rabbi such and such, Rabbi Joe Blow. They were always quoting somebody who was an accepted authority because it kept them safe to do so. Jesus, on the other hand, got up there and he read from the scriptures, as we see elsewhere in the New Testament. He read from the scriptures, but then he would sit down to teach and he would tell them what he thought. And he wouldn't make reference to any of their rabbis, although if he did, I hate to think how that reference may have been made. He spoke of his own authority. And the people were amazed. Why? They were amazed that somebody would have the guts to do it. Because it was a dangerous business. Especially some of the somewhat radical views that I have no doubt he put forward. Including at some points claiming that he was the Son of God. A dangerous business. But there he was, and that's what he did. And it amazed them that he would do that. He was speaking in his own authority. But that, of course, can be challenged, can't it? I can stand up here and I can speak with the authority of the Queen. Doesn't mean I have the authority of the Queen, but I can speak and claim that I do. So the second thing in this story, he shows authority over evil spirits. Now this one couldn't be challenged because it happened right in front of their faces, and this person with an evil spirit, the evil spirit spoke up and caused this calamity, and with a command he drove this evil spirit out. Now, this was not a strange thing to them. They knew about evil spirits. And they had, in their time, they had their own exorcists, their people who practiced driving out these evil spirits. But it was a dangerous business. The person trying to drive out an evil spirit could be killed in the process, or the person that the spirit is being driven out of could be killed or harmed in the process. This was not unknown, but it was a dangerous, long, drawn-out, and very imprecise thing. And Jesus ordered it out with a command, and he went, "Ah!" and ran away. And the people were left saying, "What is this? Some new kind of teaching?" Well, yes, in a really, really big way. Okay? Somebody who has authority unlike anything we have ever seen is standing in front of us, and it shouldn't surprise us too much that he's speaking with his own authority, because look what he just did. The action with the evil spirit validates the claim that he has the right to speak in his own authority. The presumption is if he hasn't the right to speak for God, God will not be with him. And if God is not with him, he can't drive out the evil spirit. And so Mark joins those two things into the one story. He chooses that story to tell in that way to make those 2 points in the one story. He's running short of parchment, and it's only chapter 1. We move on. Mark chapter 2, verses 1 to 12.
A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralysed man, carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it, and then lowered the mat the man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralysed man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some teachers of the law were sitting there, thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier, to say to this paralysed man, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take your mat and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So he said to the man, "I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home." He got up, took his mat and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this."
I'll bet they hadn't. Did you pick what the 2 claims of authority are in that story? What was the first one? Forgiving sins. The second one? Healing the human body in that one. Okay, the paralysed man. It's not quite so easy to pick it in but it's authority to heal the human body at a command. There's 2 claims. And he lays it out right at the end of that. He says, "I will show you that the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins," so he heals the man. It's that exact same reason. Son of Man is a phrase he used to describe himself. It dates back into the book of Daniel in the Old Testament and is an indirect way of making a claim that he's the Messiah to the Jewish people. Okay, that's all that is. So Son of Man means Jesus. I will show you that I have authority to forgive sins. If I claim that and it's not true, God can't be with me. But if God is with me, I can heal this man. Watch me heal the man. And so those 2 stories do this, and we come out of that story knowing that Jesus has authority to forgive sins by his own word, and he has the power to heal the human body at his own command. There are more, so let's keep going. Mark chapter 4. Alan, I think you're up.
Over the evening came and said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was. In the boat there were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples both came up and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up and rebuked the wind and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you have no faith? They were terrified and asked each other, Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.
How funny, they asked the same question that we're asking. Who is this? Who is this Jesus? They were in the boat with him. They were travelling the countryside with him. And now they met something that absolutely terrified them. So the Jewish people hated the water. Right? It was to them, before creation, we say void. Right? What to them was chaos was the waters before creation. Everything was just water. And in the creation story in Genesis 1, you see that God separated the waters and created a dome within the waters. Well, that was the creation of the world in the ancient flat world view that they had. And the chaos is the water. And when they're out on the lake, right, and water in the lake is like the chaos waters breaking in through the bottom of the dome where God didn't set land. Okay, so when they get in a squall and a storm at sea and it threatens to swamp the boat, it's the chaos. It's the primordial chaos threatening to drag them back down to the depths, out of God's creation. It's a terrifying thing to them. The Jews, given the way that they understood creation from their creation story, they kind of were terrified of the water. And this was a terrible thing to them. But look what Jesus did. Jesus commanded not just the storm, but the water as well. The water that belongs outside of creation, the water of chaos. He commands to the storm and the waters, be still. And with a command, they are still. He creates calm in the chaos. And these guys who are tuned to this way of thinking about the world in which they worked, and they know so well, are absolutely terrified. Who is this guy who can do what God did when he created the world, which is command the waters and make something out of the chaos? And now, from our point of view, we look at it and go, it was like a nature miracle. We don't have that pre-creation thing. We don't have the terror of it that they had, but perhaps we should. Have you ever stood up on the front of a boat out in a storm at sea, stood up on the front of the boat, which is the most likely place to die, because it's going to pitch most and toss you the furthest, and stand up there and command the winds, the wave, the storm, and command it to be still? Anyone done that? I didn't. I've stood there with an anchor, desperately trying to hook the boat up. And guess what? I was terrified. And I got back inside as soon as I could. He did this and showed them that he had authority over nature. If you'll have the story, he'll show it to you too. But it's not the only one. There are a couple of others. Better known than calming the storm is again out on the sea, and Jesus does what? He walks on the water, and Peter goes out for a while with him, and then for a dip. We know that one very well. Better known than that even, he feeds crowds of 4,000 and 5,000 people. In Mark's Gospel, it's on two occasions, first 5,000, then 4,000 people from a few dinner loaves and a couple of small fish. A boy's lunchbox. And he feeds all these people from it, and there's more left over than he starts with. It's another nature miracle. There's no people involved in it, just the materials that belong to this world, and he, in the case of that last one, he blesses it. He doesn't even make a command, he just blesses it and starts handing it out. And that was so impressive to the people, they wanted to make him king. It's like, no more starvation here. We'll just give him a dinner loaf, we're all good. But here, in this story and in those other stories, Jesus demonstrates authority over nature itself. Who has authority over nature itself? Only the one who created it. Again, it's a claim that he's acting with the authority of God, and only a son of God could do that. We have one more to take, otherwise we would be here all day. It's in Mark chapter 5, and we'll meet one more.
He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat.
As if they were not going to tell anybody about it. Everybody knew she'd died. That was the commotion. And now everybody was going to know that she'd been brought back to life. As if not telling people about it would make any difference. Actually, there's a secret thing in there. It doesn't actually relate to the authority business, but it's worth mentioning. There's in brackets, it makes that comment, she was 12 years old. Now, I may have the historical thing slightly wrong, but it's something like this. That at 12 years of age, the only people who are supposed to touch a girl will be either her father, maybe her brothers, but her father and her betrothed. Because that was the way their culture worked. And so somebody else ought never to come along and actually touch the girl. You just didn't do that. It was taboo. And Jesus came, she died, but he came and took her by the hand and lifted her out of bed. I wonder whether or not the strict instructions were not to tell anybody about that, given that it was a taboo, and it was probably a taboo that he could do without worrying about it. It was like the crumb on the floor that was, we just sweep it under the carpet because it doesn't matter. What matters is what just happened to her life. And there was no sweeping that under the carpet. But in that story, it demonstrates that he even had authority over life itself. It's not the only story. Much better known than that one is Jesus raising Lazarus back to life. And much less known, there was a widow at Nain whose son had died, her only son had died, and in the funeral procession, Jesus raises him back to life out on the funeral bier as they're walking down the street. One of the strangest stories, and probably why it's not so well known, is that most of the time we try to avoid it. But all the same, there are these stories in there that demonstrate that Jesus has authority over life itself. We don't count his resurrection in those stories because there he is the one who's died and God is acting, and we're not seeing Jesus act with his authority, we're seeing God act. But in these stories, Jesus does not, this is not the pattern in any of these stories we've read. Jesus does not come and go, "Abba, Father," as he called his dad, "listen to my prayer." You don't see any of that. You see him giving a command as one who has authority himself. And that is the very point that Mark wants to make. Jesus has this authority because he's the Son of God. Primarily, that's why we're using the language. They understood this whole father-son authority relationship. And therefore, the best way to describe Jesus was Son of God. Everybody would understand what that meant because of the authority deal. The other reason was that habit Jesus had of talking about his father as, in Aramaic, Abba, or more likely Abba. But it meant daddy without any childish connotation, just an intimate relationship with his father. That was the word he used. And if Jesus talks to God as Father, it sounds like a good way for us in our limited language to talk about his relationship with God. Yes, it's weird because we also see that there is one God, and there's never been a claim anywhere through the Bible that says that there's more than one God. There is one God. It's just that we have seen Jesus here and God was still there, and how do we use language to say that? And we get, by the time you add the Holy Spirit to it, we get the whole conversation about the Trinity, and we get ourselves tied up in knots. But Why would you think that our minds and our language would be able to accurately describe God? That would kind of make us the gods and Jesus the one that was there for us to explain and describe. God is the one who is bigger than all, and certainly bigger than our minds and our language. So why be surprised that it's too hard to say? But the reason we say Son of God is because of this whole deal of authority. But there's one more that we have not read, and we won't, only for the sake of time. There are occasions on the way through the Gospels where we hear Jesus exercising authority over people. Last week before, recently, we read the story of Jesus calling some fishermen. Walking along the seashore, and he sees them out by the nets, and he says, "Hey, come and follow me. Leave all that." And they drop their nets and off they go and follow him. And that is a weird story. It really is. And on another occasion to a tax collector, if I recall correctly. He just says, "Well, leave all that, come on, off you come." And other occasions, but there are other occasions where he says to people, "Follow me." And in one case he says it to somebody and they say, "Oh, can we wait till I buried my father? Dad's probably not sick yet." And he goes, "Well, no, this is the day. This is the day that I'm here. This is the day that I'm calling you. This is the day to follow or not follow." We don't know whether he did or not. The well-known rich young man who says, "Well, what must I do?" And he says, "Well, do all this." And he says, "Well, I do." He says, "Oh, one more thing. Sell all you've got. Come follow me." And he goes away sad because he's wealthy and he can't leave all of that. So he doesn't follow. Whereas Jesus has authority over, well, let's just summarize it, all of creation without qualification. This one thing he gives a choice to and says, "Will you follow me?" If you say no, it doesn't mean he doesn't have authority over you. He does. He has authority over you. But as to whether or not in this life you are going to submit to that and say, "Yes, I'll walk with you. Yes, I will go with you," he gives us that choice. He drives the evil spirit out with a command. There's no choice. He heals the body. There's no choice. He stills the storm. There's no choice. In all those stories, there is no choice given. He does it without... It's just absolute authority exercised as you would think it would be. But in this case, he says, "Will you?" And in our whole series, this question of Jesus is going to hang over every one of us. And if you've decided this in the past, let it hang there so that you might renew it. If you've never made the decision to follow Jesus, or say no, if you're still working it out, make sure you realize it's hanging there through the whole of this series. Jesus most surely says to you, "Will you follow me?" That's the gospel. That's why we've been given it to give out to others. Because Jesus is now forever saying, "Will you follow me? Will you follow me?" And we will learn some stuff. You know, I would not say to anybody after just this session, "Hey, quick, down on your knees." There's some stuff to know about what Jesus did, how it works for us, how we live it, and all that sort of stuff that we need to talk about before we get to that. But we're going to get to it. The bit where I say, "So how's it going to be for you?" It's not really me who's saying it. Really, it's Jesus who's saying it. He says, "Will you follow me?" And he wants an answer. Because just as it was 2,000 years ago, physically walking around the country, I'm here today, but I'm gone tomorrow. The day that you know he's issuing that invitation to you is the day to say yes or no. Because you may never feel that sense of call from Jesus another time. You're here. You're hearing it. This is the day. Who knows when that day will come again? It was very obvious to them. He was off down the track. But so is our series. It really is constantly asking the question, will you follow this Jesus? This Son of God, as best we can name him. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, what authority you showed, how you amazed them, because truly they never had seen anything like you, nor has there been anyone like you, because there is no one beside you. You are uniquely God and Son of God, and we hear your call. We do. Some of us hear it clearer than others, but we hear your call, saying, will you follow me? And how I pray that we will choose life as you offer it to us, and indeed follow you. Amen.